In 1996, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study Legacy Committee was organized to develop a strategy to address the emotional damages of the study, to hold the federal government accountable for more ethical research practices, and to persuade the federal government to publicly acknowledge their role in harming this community of Black Americans. And in 1997, President Bill Clinton apologized publicly, stating, "It is not only in remembering that shameful past that we can make amends and repair our nation, but it is in remembering that past that we can build a better present and a better future. The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong."
So I'm not with nobody, cause I don't wanna hurt nobody. Did it over text, didn't call me. Still got love for your mommy. I know you wanna be somebody, even if you gotta leave some.
Here I have a full 13-minute video to give you guys a history in regards to how we got here before we start the PowerPoint slide. And I'm actually going to give you a little bit of insight from a health professional's point of view in regards to why the African-American community numbers tend to be higher and we get treated less. Here we go.
And this is Crash Course Black American History. I want you to imagine that you're in the shoes of this person. You're being offered free medical treatment by a team of doctors that work for the U.S. government.
Fair use.
And for context, there aren't really a lot of doctors that live near you. And these doctors from the government seem like people you can trust. Plus, it's free. So it seems like a really great opportunity to get health care when you might not otherwise have access to it. But what if when you went to see this team of doctors, people who you trusted, you were actually, without your knowledge, made to be part of an experiment? And what if, as part of that experiment, you had medication purposefully withheld from you? Medication that could have saved your life, but because it was kept from you, it led to years-long debilitating illness and even the possibility of death for you, your friends, and your family. I mean, it sounds like a horror movie, but it wasn't. This was very real, and it happened to very real people. Today, we're talking about the Tuskegee Syphilis study.
This is something that a lot of people in the Black community have somewhat heard about, but they never knew the history behind it. So hopefully I can give you guys a little bit more clarification in regards to the Tuskegee experiment and how this affects the Black community till this day. Let's continue.
First, a note on terminology. While the study is famously called the Tuskegee Syphilis Study or Experiment, some scholars disagree with that name. The people of Tuskegee, they believe, are not to blame for what happened. And some argue that the framing of it being named the Tuskegee Experiment implicitly places the blame and burden on that community, rather than the government.
Tuskegee has an issue with all of the history books and all the college, high school books that actually teach this stuff. They have an issue with them calling it the Tuskegee Experiment. It's a government that actually conducted the study. So let's continue.
Discrimination and prejudice have long been part of the way we practice medicine in the United States. This isn't new. In fact, it started in the earliest days of slavery. Enslaved Black Americans were rarely treated humanely by physicians in the antebellum South. Oftentimes, they were only examined when their ability to bear children or to work was in question. And many physicians experimented with new medical treatments on enslaved Black Americans without their consent.
All right. So real quick, did you hear what they said? They used to do medical experiments and studies on Black slaves. Do you think they had anesthesia out there? Do you think they were knocking these Black folks out before they did these experiments? Absolutely not. They did these experiments on Black people while they were alive and awake. Some of them died while they were doing it, especially in the gynecology field. A lot of our studies in regards to gynecology actually came from slave days because they would do these experiments and these studies on actual live Black slaves, women. It's tough to think about because of the fact that we understand why a lot of our women have their reservations about going to the hospital when they're pregnant. If you guys don't know, a lot of Black women are having issues with their OBGYNs because they're not giving them the medication. They're not listening to their issues that they're having while
Evidence
pregnant.
is showing that Black women are dying giving birth. Why can't we have a conversation about things that are killing people? My life matters.
When I became a nurse, I knew I'd have a lot more on my plate than just patient care. The healthcare system is stained by its historic and ongoing abuses against Black people, and demanding change has been slow and frustrating.
In her first trimester, Aziza says she was exhausted. When she told her doctor she was concerned about anemia, the response?
Of course you're tired, you're pregnant. And me, this is my first child.
But this very athletic 41-year-old says it got worse. By her 7th month, she could barely hold her head up and demanded a blood test. The results? She was dangerously anemic and had to have infusions.
It felt like my throat dropped into my stomach because it was there in concrete that I wasn't imagining this.
Some people have said, and this is not proven, they believe that Black people have a higher pain tolerance as opposed to other races of people. But a lot of Black women are having issues with their OBGYN and the hospitals because of those facts. They're not listening to them when they have certain issues. And I know Serena Williams just went through her issues.
Serena had to demand additional medical attention because her stitches reopened due to an uncontrollable cough, and she could just feel something was really wrong. Writing, I spoke to the nurse. I told her I need to have a CAT scan of my lungs bilaterally, and then I need to be on my heparin drip. She said, I think all this medicine is making you talk crazy. I said, no, I'm telling you what I need. I need the scan immediately, and I need it to be done with dye. The doctors found that the new mom had a blood clot in her lungs, which needed to be broken up before it reached her heart. After a total of 4 surgeries, Serena was finally able to leave the hospital a week after giving birth.
I think they need to start looking into that. But all of that stems back from all the issues that us as Black people have faced when we were, enslaved. So I just wanted to be clear. It's not like they were doing these studies on willing and able, people that volunteered to sit there and get, cut open and things of that nature. No, we were slaves. So we, whatever they did to us, we had to endure. And it's shameful, it's hurtful, and it's sad that we didn't hear about this stuff. A lot of people didn't hear about this stuff until you got older. So this is your first time hearing about this. This is good. Hovered over my baby during pregnancy and birth. Yeah, man, absolutely. And I encourage husbands, boyfriends, when your wives and girlfriends are pregnant, man, if she says something is wrong, then you need to take that as serious. Especially if it's a Black woman, because of the fact that Black women do have their reservations about how they're taken care of in these hospitals. And that's coming from a healthcare professional. So I just want to make sure I'm very clear on that. Guys, gentlemen, y'all make sure y'all take care of these women because they may have some preconceived notions about what's going on with them when they're pregnant. So make sure you listen to them.
Entire fields of study, like the field of gynecology, were built on the backs of Black Americans being exploited and experimented on by the medical system. Many physicians and scientists of this era falsely believed, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously, that Black people are biologically distinct or even inferior to white people. For example, physicians and scientists in the United States incorrectly believe that syphilis, a contagious sexually transmitted disease that can also make the sexual partners of the infected individual and their children sick, affected those of European descent and African descent differently.
They're going to explain here how they thought that syphilis was going to affect Black people in regards to their cardiovascular, and it was only going to affect people of European descent in the brain. That was one of the main reasons why they approached this outbreak or this study so differently, because of the fact that they thought Black people were inferior, and it wasn't, the disease wasn't, I guess, strong enough, so to speak, to affect the brain in the Black people, because they thought our brains were smaller. They thought we were an inferior race, so on and so forth. So they're going to continue. Here we go.
More, many physicians and scientists thought that white Americans had more developed brains than Black Americans. And so even though it was apparent that white Americans could develop syphilis, it was believed that they would suffer more neurological symptoms as the disease progressed. These same physicians and scientists believed that Black Americans had less developed brains and were ruled by more basic organ functions. So they posited that black people would suffer more cardiovascular complications rather than neurological. The Tuskegee Syphilis study gave researchers and physicians the opportunity to test these deeply troubling, medically dubious, and just plain old racist theories. So in 1932, 600 African American men from Macon County, Alabama, were recruited to participate in this experiment conducted by the Public Health Service.
600 black men. They recruited them. Now, some of this stuff is actually going to surprise you all to see who had a hand in this, but the Public Health Service actually did this. And as you guys know, I'm a public health professional. One of the main reasons why I got into this was to hopefully educate the black community in regards to what's going on with the public health system and try and mend some of those issues that we had in the past because of this Tuskegee experiment. And I'm going to show you how this affects black people till this day. And that's why I'm trying to do my part in this career field to make sure that we can try and mend those issues that we had based off of this study. So let's continue.
399 of the men were already diagnosed with syphilis, and 201 were not. So the goal of the study, essentially, was to see what happens to black people when you don't treat syphilis. At the time the study started, penicillin wouldn't be a confirmed treatment for syphilis for over a decade, but there were still recommended treatments for the disease that were withheld.
So they withheld the treatments that they had already, they were trying to test, so to speak. They did not give the treatments to those black men that did the study and that actually affected them. So you guys just saw me show you primary, secondary syphilis. That's how they pretty much found out about that, because they withheld those medications from those 600 black men, especially from the 399 that actually had it already. They withheld the medication, so that's how they found out about primary and secondary syphilis.
And penicillin would eventually be withheld too. The word unethical doesn't even begin to cover how abhorrent this was. The researchers did not test the alternative theory that white people had worse neurological symptoms than black Americans, or even have any white participants in this study at all. In addition to their theories, they based their justification for the study on another study done on all white subjects called the Oslo Study of Untreated Syphilis. But when this study was published, it strongly advocated for treating the subject of syphilis and warned against doing otherwise. Regardless, the researchers proceeded with the study and chose the Tuskegee Institute as the place where they would base their project. Many of the subjects were poor and uneducated sharecroppers who lived throughout rural Alabama. Many of them had never seen a doctor before, nor had they received any traditional medical care. But in this context, it might have felt to them like they were getting an extraordinary amount of treatment. The participants had to have a lot of blood tests, x-rays, and spinal taps, and a lot of tests to see how the disease impacted the population. For participating in the study, the men were offered medical care and burial insurance. And since black Americans were hit really hard by the Great Depression, these types of incentives were extremely compelling.
So that was one of the reasons why those 600 men actually volunteered for this study, because of the fact that these men were poor. And that's why sometimes, you get on social media and you hear certain conservatives, they'll speak about, well, why haven't black men, black people, and then in the black community, you hear a lot of our black women say, well, why haven't black men did this or did that? You guys have to understand that there's a lot of things that we went through. And keep in mind, this was in 1932. That's not too long ago, guys. You guys are going to be surprised to see when the study actually ended. So this is why you guys need to make sure that you're very mindful in regards to how you try and shame black men in particular, because we went through a lot. And from, by the grace of God, we're still here and we thriving. And that's the one main thing that I try and educate black women on, especially in these spaces. Sometimes all that hate that you have for black men, you have to sit back and think that these black men were actually protecting y'all asses when we were at our worst of the worst, and we were still married to y'all. At the very least, show some respect and stop trying to use everything against us and say, hey, well, slavery was a long time ago. Why haven't you guys did this and did that? Y'all better watch that, man, because it's not like you're helping the black community. I'm talking directly to black women. because it seems like when you guys say that stuff, you think it's going to help, but it's actually driving black men away. So just be mindful of how you speak to black men, because we've been through a lot. And not saying that black women haven't been through a lot as well, but we're the ones that sit here and protect the black community. No matter what black women say, we don't protect black women or whatever. All that goes in one ear and out the other, because I know the statistics. I've actually reported on them. What I did was I put in the search engine, year of incident, right here. You see it, 2020. Sex of the victim, female. And then race of victim, black. Sex of oldest offender, male. Race of oldest offender, black male. Now, if you look here, go to the total. What does that say? 995. 995 deletions were black men deleting black women. So in 2020, there were 21.68 million black women living in the U.S., 995 deletions in 2020. That percentage of black women being deleted by black men, 995 deletions in 2020 that were done by black men, that percentage comes out to 0.004589%. Black women are very protected. If you don't feel protected, go find a husband. Let's continue.
The black unemployment rate in the South at that time was around 50%. And many of these men needed benefits for themselves.
Black unemployment rate was at 50%. I just shared a post where it said right now the black men unemployment rate is at 5.3. And for black women, it's at 5.9 right now. So if you look at back then, it was 50%. So let's continue.
And their families. They were also given rides to and from the study, meals on the day that they were present, and free treatment for minor illnesses and ailments. Even though the study was set up like a traditional research study with control groups and experimental groups, the subjects were never actually told that they were part of a study at all.
Did y'all hear that? They weren't even told that they were a part of some study. They just thought that they were getting free medical treatment, get fed here or there, but they did not tell them that they were a part of a medical study. That's actually illegal now. So let's continue.
And did agree to be examined and treated by the doctors. They weren't told that they were being experimented on. Essentially, the researchers never received a really important thing called informed consent. Informed consent is when a researcher tells a research subject about the study they're participating in, the risk involved, and gives them the option of whether to participate or not.
So if you are part of a study in present day and they don't give you informed consent where you have to sign the form that says that you are fully aware of what's going on, then that would be illegal. So hopefully that makes sense, guys.
Informed consent is important because it acknowledges that the participant has the agency to make their own decision for their own body. What the men were told was that they were receiving treatment for something called bad blood, a local term used to describe a number of different illnesses that resembled anemia and fatigue. What's even worse is that even the broader black community in rural
anemia and fatigue, that's very common in a lot of people. So if you tell somebody, hey, I'm treating you because you feel lethargic, or you feel a little bit sleepy, or you're always cold or something like that, then we're like, oh, okay, cool. I got no problem with that. Yeah, I do have those symptoms. That's very common.
Alabama had been misled about what the public health service was doing. Many of these men were recruited by black doctors, local.
Did you guys know that? A lot of the black men that were recruited out of that 600, our black doctors and pastors actually, recruited them. Let's continue.
Pastors, teachers, and community leaders, demonstrating that many people thought that the men could benefit from joining. This is an important point because the study members of the Tuskegee community were led to believe that this was a special government program that would be worthwhile for themselves and the whole community. A black nurse named Eunice Rivers, who's a very controversial figure in this incident, helps demonstrate how complicated this all was. She was one of the first Black American women to work for the United States Public Health Service, and she helped recruit the 600 men into the study. Today, many scholars wrestle with whether or not she was complicit in what took place.
Nurse Eunice Rivers. There's a lot of controversy in regards to, Nurse Rivers, to the point that they're asking questions like, did she know what they were doing? I'm not sure. There's no record, to my knowledge, to say that she admitted that she knew that they were doing the study in regards to syphilis on these Black men. But to the best of my knowledge, she thought that they were just doing this study because of the reasons that I mentioned before. They thought these men were lethargic, fatigued, anemic, things of that nature. But there is some think pieces out there, and I know that I have a couple of friends who are actual nurses, and they actually touched on this while they were in nursing school. Some people say that she knew that they were doing this in regards to syphilis, and some say that she didn't. Let's continue.
If she was a victim who had been misled herself, even after penicillin was discovered as a cure for the disease and became a standard of care in the 1940s.
Back in 1932, now we're in the 1940s. Penicillin is here, but they still didn't give it to him. So let's continue.
Offered treatment by the study. The United States Public Health Service researchers withheld medication and critical information about it from their subject. As a result, many of the men died, went blind, or experienced severe mental health issues due to the untreated syphilis ravaging their bodies. And many of their wives and children caught syphilis as well.
So out of the 600, a lot of those men actually died because of their issues that they had with untreated syphilis, right? So that's why I continuously encourage you all to get tested. You do not want to go untreated because it could start affecting other things within your body. Get tested. Make sure that you're good to go. Let's continue.
Eventually, a United States Public Health Service venereal disease investigator named Peter Buxton started to ask questions about why the study was happening and whether it was ethical. He leaked the information to the press in 1972.
1972. Remember, this started in 1932. We're in 1972 now. That's not too far. That's not too long ago, guys. Well, let's continue.
Story prompted so much national outrage that the decades-long study was finally shut down. In the summer of 1973, an attorney named Fred Gray and the NAACP filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of the individuals who participated in the study and their families. They ended up settling for more than $9 million.
To me personally, that's definitely not enough. $9 million. A lot of folks, when they think about it, they're like, oh, 1932, 1945, that's when the Tuskegee experiment stopped. No, it stopped in 1972. How many years is that from now? My public math is kind of off. Was that 51 years ago? Man, let's continue.
For the study participants. The U.S. government also promised to give the surviving victims free medical service and burial services as a form of compensation through the Tuskegee Health Benefit Program, which provided medical care for the study's survivors. And in 1975, the wives, widows, and children of the participants were added to the program as well. An important outgrowth of this infamous study is the National Research Act, which was signed into law in 1974. This act was a critical force in protecting the rights of study participants and shaping research ethics in the United States.
So that's where, the informed consent that I was telling you guys about. If you're going to be a part of any medical study, they have to let you know what you're being studied for. Back then, when the Tuskegee experiment happened, they didn't tell those gentlemen, and you see what happened. Do you really think they would have signed up for what they were doing to them? Absolutely not. So that's how long it took to get this law intact so we can start protecting people who are involved in studies.
It created the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, which identified basic principles of research and ways to ensure that those principles were followed. The Commission's recommendations required researchers to always get informed consent from all of their study participants. In 1996, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study Legacy Committee was organized to develop a strategy to address the emotional damages of the study, to hold the federal government accountable for more ethical research practices, and to persuade the federal government to publicly acknowledge their role in harming this community of Black Americans. And in 1997, President Bill Clinton apologized publicly, stating, "It is not only in remembering that shameful past that we can make amends and repair our nation, but it is in remembering that past that we can build a better present and a better future. The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. We also..."
So that actually took a lot for President Clinton to actually acknowledge and admit that the U.S. government was wrong in regards to what they did to those gentlemen in the Tuskegee experiment. And he actually got a lot of pushback for that because they never wanted to take blame. You see, it took, what was that, 1996, 97, when he did that, apology and saying that, hey, we were wrong in doing so. And the Tuskegee experiment started in 1932. It took a while.
Also want to emphasize that this is recent history. This didn't happen in like the 1700s or 1800s. This study ended in 1972. And this experiment is also one of the reasons why some Black Americans are skeptical of doctors and researchers. Many still carry the memory of this deception deep in their bones. Today, many research studies in the United States still have few, if any, Black Americans in their experiments. This is important to note because non-diverse studies are not as effective and can lead to medical mistakes in the future. Part of this is tied to the fear that Black people have about how they might be treated in these studies. But another part of it is that sometimes researchers don't adequately reach out to these communities. And one more thing. While the Tuskegee experiment absolutely does have repercussions that continue to be felt today, it is not necessarily the all-encompassing cause for all inequality in the medical system. What it is a microcosm of a larger historical trauma, and it is one of many factors, both historical and contemporary, that contribute to inequality in healthcare. This is worth saying explicitly because by putting an outsized portion of the blame on a single historical event, people can put less blame on the current systems and structures that contribute to racism and discrimination in the medical community today. As USC sociologist Karen Lincoln told NPR in 2021, if you say Tuskegee, then you don't have to acknowledge things like pharmacy deserts, things like poverty and unemployment. You can just say, that happened then, and there's nothing we can do about it. Sometimes, racism in the medical and scientific community is not always as clear and blatant as it was in Tuskegee. Sometimes, it's more subtle and less easy to identify. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. And it's only by naming these things directly that we will be able to build a scientific and medical system that serves everyone in our country with justice and compassion.
All right. That's the end of the documentary, the short documentary. I want to thank that brother for putting that together. But yeah, so the reason why he said that at the end, where people try and justify things, hey, it happened, just let it go. And we hear that a lot about the Black community. Slavery happened so many years ago. You guys just need to, let it go and pull yourselves up from the bootstraps or by the bootstraps. You guys have heard that narrative before multiple times. And those are the issues that the Black community is still facing. Even though it's been years and years since all this stuff happened, we still have psychological effects that have not been addressed. There's a lot of things that have not been addressed with the Black community where people are simply saying that we just need to forget about it and move on about our days. And they're saying, why haven't you guys progressed at the rate of, let's say, the Asian community or the white community? Is because of the fact that we still have those psychological issues that we have to deal with. Trust and believe. The people that are born now, I was not a slave, but I'm pretty sure that some of that trauma has been passed down genetically. And that sounds crazy, but I know that we have the effects of that. So that's why I think it's very important that we have these conversations and we get an understanding, not only from, the federal government side, but also from the Black community is, side. The more that we continue to sit here and argue with each other and not accept the statistics and not accept the data, it doesn't make any sense, because at the end of the day, we all still Black. They still see us as the same. So at some point, we're going to have to come to the table. On Black women's side, you're going to have to acknowledge the fact that Black men are not as bad as you think. You're going to have to acknowledge the statistics. You're going to have to change your ways. Black men, we got to stop killing each other. Even though there's only a small percentage of our Black men doing that, there's still a percentage of Black men doing that. We have to stop. We somewhat take the responsibility for all these issues that Black people had in the past. We take it off of the federal government and off of the United States, because we continuously participate in this bad behavior and we're not doing nothing to pull ourselves out of it. It starts from us. So when I'm talking about these statistics and I'm trying to level set the conversation, it's not to make a certain community or Black women look bad or Black men look bad. It's just to help us understand where we stand and where we need to improve. And we will never improve if we keep fighting amongst one another. It has to stop at some point. And one of the ways that we can actually see how this affects the Black community until this day, look here. So not too long ago in 2020, we just had the C-19 outbreak, right? So the reason why the Black community had the highest death rates in the U.S. is because of the fact that the Tuskegee experiment was actually cited by a lot of Black Americans as to why they did not want to come in for treatment, as to why they didn't want to get the vaccination. We still have those reservations about the health service because of the Tuskegee experiment. And this is in 2021. We've done research on that. We've had questionnaires done where there'll be Black people. They'll say, hey, I'm not getting this because I remember what happened with the Tuskegee experiment. So this is how this stuff affects us for, decades and decades. And me as a public health professional, I have a tough task. I have a tough task of trying to educate Black people on the importance of maintaining their health and getting certain vaccinations. I can't make you do anything, but I do have a tough task, and I understand that. I'm well aware of our history and how we feel about, health service in the United States. And I'm definitely trying my best to make sure that we can, right our wrongs, so to speak. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Like I said, this is not the normal stuff that you guys see in these spaces, but you guys can consider me an outlier. I'm pretty much going to, I'm going to be one-on-one. So you're going to get a lot of different topics from my platform. I'm not involved in any group. This is just me. I'm going to build this by myself. I'm going to do it with the support of y'all. I'm not involved in any kind of group on YouTube, on Facebook. I don't identify with any type of category. It's just me. And I like it like that. I thrive in these type of situations. We got to do better. Protection, get tested. You got to put these plans into action to make sure that we are protected and get these numbers down. These things are preventable. I mean, it's not going to always be 100%, but we got to do our part. It's that simple, because our numbers are leading the pack for chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. Protect yourselves.